We are going to start. This is our last
Oh, is this
session.
my paper?
That is your paper. We're going to do two, maybe three if we have time for the third things in this session. One of the things was that last week we looked at and kind of led you through the process of shaping your own faith story around your verse that you picked. And I want to know there's no obligation for people to share that story, but if you want to share that story, I want to know. Now we're going to do it later, but I want to know now so we leave enough time for that. So let me know if if you want to share that later. There's no obligation to, but if you do, let me know.
Well, I'll share it.
Okay.
It's not long.
That's
Mine
fine.
isn't
It'd
either.
take 2 minutes or 1 minute to read it.
1 minute?
Well, I can
mine's, do a minute.
Mine's paraphrased.
So we'll leave about 20 minutes at the end to do that. So by 10:45, we're gonna make sure that we switch to that. And Rick, can you be our time enforcer?
Sure.
So shut me up
Do you have a timer at
at
home? It'll
10:45. The other, if we have time, after stories to share, I just want to have a little time to get your feedback because I was kind of doing this. This is kind of the outline of the book that I'm going to be working on in the next few months. So I wanted to give you guys some time to tell me, like, did this make sense? Did it not make sense? Be like super harsh, like, Fritz, you're wasting your time. Fritz, I really wish we
You
talked
don't want
about
us to
this or
lie.
that.
You don't want us to lie.
I don't.
Okay.
I don't. I mean, honestly, if this has been like the biggest confusing mess that you've ever seen, I'd rather hear that now than after I've written the book. Because I think it's going to be a lot of work to write the book.
Well, your wife will go through it, won't she?
If I pay her.
She should have been here so she could give her
Yes.
opinion about what we've done.
Right, yeah.
She has not yet offered her services, and I might very well have to pay her. My wife does not work for free.
Yeah, and she probably couldn't be here because she's working.
But I want to start out today talking a little bit about listening. So listening is the flip side of storytelling. It's the flip side of sharing. I mean, you don't everyone a story in isolation is still a story, but it just stays with you. The listener is what's needed to kind of bring the story alive and help articulate the story. I mean, if Jesus wandered around Galilee and nobody listened to him, we wouldn't have a New Testament.
Right.
If Moses saw the burning bush and never told anybody, we wouldn't have the Exodus. So listening is as important as telling or sharing. And you all have experienced this in your lives, right? Have you ever had an experience where you were lucky to have someone who really was able to listen to you?
Well, not my kids were growing up. They were busy talking I try to tell them something and they would be talking and talking. I used to get so mad at my kids. Were your kids like that?
So your kids couldn't listen.
Well, they were, I tried to tell them something and they were talking to each other and everything. I don't know. I mean, this is when they were little.
But have you had a moment, a time when you really felt heard by someone at some moment? Like you shared something and you really felt like the person you shared it with really heard what you were saying.
Imagine so.
I would suppose, yeah, with all our lives, we would say things to our children. Hopefully, it's,
Yeah,
no
spouses.
lying, no cheating, but you
Spousal
specific,
Conversations.
Yeah,
like more of a conversation,
yeah,
you're saying.
yeah.
Well, no, I'm not actually talking about a conversation. There's a difference between a conversation and being heard.
Oh,
I mean, conversations can have moments of being heard, but you can also have a complete conversation where you've not been heard. Where, I mean, like,
Give an example.
again, let me give an example. We'll go into marriage. A time when in your marriage you really felt hurt by something your partner had done.
That
And you go and you try to explain to your partner why you feel hurt. And your partner does not hear why you feel hurt, or doesn't care why you feel hurt, or just can't understand why you feel hurt. I mean, I'll pick on my dad. You know, if when I was growing up, I was having a really, really bad day, and my dad's like, "Well, what's wrong with you?" I'm like, "I'm just having a really, really bad day." My dad's like, "Well, get over it." No,
that sounds like a typical answer.
no sense of why are you having a bad day?
Oh, he never asked you that.
Oh, no. My dad doesn't do feelings. Um, no sense of helping process the bad day. Or can we, so that's not being heard. So listening is caring.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, when my dad said, just to continue this group therapy process as I deal with my frustrations about my father, you know, when my dad's like, "Well, just get over it," that's really saying, I don't care that you're having a bad day. When you're trying to work something out with a spouse and your spouse is like, "Well, I don't see it that way. It's just not a problem." That's not helpful. That's not listening. That's simply saying, I'm not going to be inconvenienced by your issues. I'm going to just go on with my life and just deal with it yourself. This is why divorces happen.
Oh, so the big words, communication.
Communication,
yeah.
but communication requires listening. And listening is something we think is easy or is basic, but is often difficult and has to be intentional. I would go so far as to say that listening, the act of listening, is a spiritual practice. It is conscious effort to pause your life, empty yourself of what you're thinking, your thoughts, your agendas, so that you can be completely and wholly present with someone else as they share their story.
Well, we could say that not just stories, but sermons.
Well,
Every Sunday, we should be sitting there and take any problems we have away and just concentrate on what
Concentrate,
we're supposed
yeah.
to be gaining as far as
Right,
the
and
scripture, but that isn't someone, just an ordinary person telling a story.
well, and
Well, they actually do tell a story when they're given a sermon,
Sometimes.
right?
Well,
depends on the preacher and the day and the hour
and the sermon.
and the sermon. But there's a difference because you're
Yeah.
right,
And
and
there would be, yeah.
So, and there are different types of listening. So, one type of listening is that performative response listening. So you go into church, you are an audience.
Yeah.
The preacher is a presenter. The musicians are the presenter. You are lined up in rows
Right.
Uh-huh.
so that you can listen. You're also, at least if you're like me and you're listening to a sermon, you're also thinking, does this make sense? Is it right? Is it engaging? Does it connect with me, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So you're in that setting, you're also invited to be, in essence, a critic of what is being presented. The same thing's true if you're at an orchestra concert, or if you're at a play, or if you're there's another type of listening which is more linked to the type of listening that was developed by counselors, therapists, spiritual directors, other people. And that is a listening whose primary purpose is to be present for the person who's speaking. When you're sitting in a sermon, you are usually, you're thinking, okay, what am I getting out of this? I'm listening to get something out of this. You're not listening to have your presence affirm the preacher. I mean, as a preacher, I'm glad you're there, honestly. But your purpose in being there is not to give me worth and value. Although if you didn't show up, I would feel like I didn't have worth and value. But very intentional listening is an act of giving of yourself to another person so that you can receive their story. And in that, you are gifting that person with your presence and with value. And you're saying, you have value, and what your story has value. And there's a guy who I have huge respect for. His name is Dave Icey. And he's right on the top of this this worksheet. Dave Icey developed this project called StoryCorps. StoryCorps is an amazing project that creates, they have a portable listening booth. And they take this listening booth all around the country. And let's say you and your son, I'm picking on Joyce today.
That's okay.
You and your son, um, really wanted some space, not to work out your stuff like in therapy, but maybe there's a time in your life that you'd never really talked about with your son because it was hard or because it was difficult. You can go to the StoryCorps booth and they help facilitate that conversation between you and your son. So think about, they do a lot of work with veterans. What happened during the war? Telling that to your kids. What happened during the war? What was it like growing up during the Depression? Or what was it like when you were in New York on 9/11? What was that experience like? What was that story? And Dave Icey talks about how when someone has a story and they're listened to, that gives them worth and value. So if you have a story and someone intentionally listens to it, that gives you worth and value. It says you're important. Just like if you have something you need to talk about with your husband and your husband sits there and listens to you, that gives you worth and value. If your husband's like and walks away, that takes away worth and value. So in this, the act of listening, intentionally listening, becomes an expression of love and affirmation and caregiving. So we're going to do a listening exercise now. I love doing this listening exercise. Rick, you may have done this before, and you are participating in it. This is an exercise called holy listening. And this is what we're going to do. So I'm going to give you a few moments to think about sometime today, before you got here, when you saw or felt something that gave you hope or a little sense of life or a smile on your face or something really basic that you felt and saw God at work in this world. Just I'm not talking about big stuff. It could be as simple as you heard a bird sing on the way here, or someone met you with a smile, or you didn't think you were going to get up this morning and you got up. I'm going to give you a few moments to think of that, and you're going to get that down to one sentence, two max. Not a big long story, not how you were walking down the street and you heard the bird and the bird flew here and the bird flew there and then the bird did this. No, I was walking down the street and I heard a bird. That's it. And we're going to go around. This is serious stuff here. And as each person shares, what all the rest of you are doing is listening to that person and sensing something within you that responds to that person. Sensing something, again, one sentence. I heard a bird singing on my way. Oh, you know, when the birds come and helps Cinderella get dressed in the movie, that,
That's two sentences now.
I know, but, so,
Is your eye bothering you, Sue?
Oh,
and you're going to, on your paper down here below, next to the person's name who's just shared, write down something to remind you of what you're thinking. And then you're going to, at the end, we're gonna go around again and you're gonna reflect back what your response to what the person shared. You're looking at me like you're,
well, then, when they share, we're gonna respond to what they said after we all share.
so,
Oh,
this is how this works. I share, we're gonna pick on the bird. I say, I heard a bird this morning and it was a blessing. Each of you put Fritz down on your piece of paper and you write down next to my name
what that meant to us.
not what it meant, what a gift of response might be. So Rick might write down the birds and a favorite song from the birds because Rick likes the birds. I don't know if you do, Rick, but it's your era. Joyce might write down I saw the birds in my bird feeder this morning. Or someone else might go to the Bible verse, the birds of the air and how God takes care of them. And you're going to share that back at the end. But you have to write it down or else you're going to forget it because you're going to do this for each person.
Does that have to be short or could it?
Short, because we don't want to be here all day.
Well, then we really can't express ourselves.
No, it's not about,
Okay,
it's
expressing.
not about fully expressing, it's just giving a little bit back.
Back.
Just
It's
giving
supposed to be
little
a
bit back.
happy, something happy.
It doesn't have to be.
Oh, it doesn't have to be happy.
Doesn't
Oh,
have
I
to.
thought you said happy.
So I'm gonna start and we'll go this way. I'm gonna give you about 3 minutes to think of something and try to get down, and you can pass. And so write on your sheet, you're gonna write Fritz, Joyce, Sue, Rick, Nora, and Mariella. So as each person shares, you're gonna put just a little bit of something that it just speaks to you. And don't overthink this. Don't overthink this at all. So I'm gonna give you a minute to think.
And the sentence is again about something that's happened us today.
Right, so you'll notice if you read your worksheet, number 1, consider an experience in the last 24 hours
oh,
of
okay.
show
Read
which
the-
touched you with some affect or feeling like joy, sorrow,
Okay.
loneliness, fear, anger. Using an I statement, briefly share the experience. Don't explain it, just share it.
Oh, in 24 hours.
Yeah, you go back 24 hours. I don't really care how far you go back, honestly. My son's excitement when we talked about our upcoming trip to Boston and going to Fenway Park. that is my joy piece that I'm hanging on.
Sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
I said, my son's excitement when we talked about going to Boston and going to Fenway Park.
Going to what?
Fenway Park, the baseball park. Joyce.
I went to lunch with friends yesterday and ordered a piece of coconut cream pie to take home, and I ate it around 7 o'clock, and it was wonderful.
What kind of pie?
Coconut cream. Is that okay?
You're doing great.
That's it.
That's it. Sue.
I went out to water my flowers this morning, and my neighbor came up the driveway and stood and visited with me, and we had a wonderful conversation.
Rick.
All right. I'm going to push this a little bit. I hope everybody's okay with it, but I heard a little bit of conversation here at the room, and it was about Lexa's caretaker. I think that's Joyce, and kind of some joy about the new cat, how pretty it looked.
Oh,
And there was a little bit of sorrow that hit me because we just had to put down our cat
oh,
a few days ago.
oh, I'm so sorry.
Okay. Joyce, you need to just you're talking, you're not listening.
I'm sorry, but I feel
can't
bad
shut up.
I know.
for you because I know
Yeah.
what it's like.
Right.
And thank you. But I don't want to mess up the exercise. But there was just a tinge there, and I was thinking like, oh, now I'm talking too much. I got to stop.
Yep.
Start.
Yep. You're done.
Yep.
Oh. Well, we need to have a minute, Hunter.
Nora.
My son Steve's back has been out of place, and I spoke with him this morning, and it's better. So I'm glad about that.
Mariella.
I have a cat that will be 1 year old in June, in a couple days, and I sing happy birthday to her. But she was leaping today. In any room she was in, it was jump up, 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 up.
That's what they do.
Which I've told her isn't what she should do.
Why not?
Okay, I'm gonna give you all a minute to kind of think what your responses are. And then what we're gonna do is, and you gotta keep this short. We're gonna start with me, and we're just gonna go around. Joyce, you give your response to me. Suzanne, you give your response to me. Rick, you give your response, and we're gonna go around, but keep them really to one sentence because we are already running later than I wanted. So keep it to one sentence. So Joyce, do you have something that, in response to what you heard from me?
I just said his son was going to Boston to Fenway Park.
No, okay, I didn't explain well. You just told me what I told you.
Yeah,
That's not what the assignment was. The assignment was to and how to articulate this. And I've done this with so many groups, but explaining this is difficult. Did that trigger something in you that you can share back?
Oh,
I'll let you think about that, and we're gonna go on to
Now, are we gonna
Suzanne.
respond for each person or just,
each person.
well, then is she supposed to
Well,
go
no,
on?
no, we just, each person, so you respond to me, we go around. You respond to Joyce, we go around.
Oh, so we're just doing you
Yeah.
now, okay,
So that I'm in a place where I can listen to you.
okay.
I know Eric's a ball player, and he must be really thrilled to be going to the baseball park. And I thought that was wonderful. Have a wonderful time.
Okay, you're getting there.
Rick has his hand up.
Yeah, Rick.
Let me try. Isn't it great to have a joyful moment with your kid?
Yeah, it
Okay.
is.
Right, you're, right, yeah, that, you're kind of, you're in the ballpark.
Okay. I'm happy for your son's anticipation.
Okay. You're out of the,
That's wrong too.
this is, I'm, as I say, I've done this
We're
with,
not good at this.
it's, does my sharing that trigger anything in you? Not that you're happy for me. Does it trigger, oh, I went to the ballpark with my son?
Okay.
Or
Oh, we got it all wrong.
Field of Dreams is my favorite movie.
Okay.
Or
Okay.
how good it is that, I'm making up a Bible verse here, but how good it is that a father and a son should spend time together, Proverbs 13:25. I just made that up, just to be clear.
Could I have another try?
Yeah, you can.
This is gonna go forever.
Yeah, we're gonna shut this
Okay.
down pretty soon.
My dad was a Cleveland Indians fan, and he took me to the ball games when I was a little girl, and we had a wonderful time.
Yep.
That would be good.
All right, and I'm gonna actually wrap this up so that we have time. This is an exercise that's used to train therapists and counselors and spiritual directors,
Well, good thing I'm not in that field.
because it starts getting at the aspect of very intentional listening, where we listen so closely to someone that what they're saying, their moods, their emotions are affecting us, and we can impart value by that connection that comes through the listening.
But we have to personalize it.
You do end up personalizing it, yeah, because that's where the connection comes from, that personalization.
I would have thought the opposite. I would have thought that by hearing you talk about Eric excitement about going to Fenway Park, and then if I'd have thought about, oh, I used to go to the ball games with my dad, I would have thought, well, I was ignoring your story
Right,
and
that's-
thinking about myself.
That's what I thought too.
Yeah,
Right, and I see that. But
We didn't put ourselves
in
into it.
in
I guess I did that too.
and we're going to talk a little bit about how in listening there is a tendency when that personal connection to then stop the other person's story and
Yeah.
tell your own.
And think only about myself.
Think only about myself. Right. But if you don't let the speaker affect you, then, and trigger in you, then there's that barrier, there's a barrier between you. You're keeping that person away. So let's kind of plunge on.
We
Well, I
failed.
guess this would be boring if it was easy, right?
Well, and this is, you,
Not really.
you didn't fail
We'd
that.
be happy if we
And-
understood it.
And I'll also admit that with that exercise, something that I've been trying to do for years has been to figure out how to, and obviously I haven't done it, encapsulate that into like a small group experience. I mean, I learned how to do this as part of my training in spiritual direction, where it was a 3-year program. We met together for a week every summer for 3 years, and then did independent work the rest of the year. And this was, the exercise is how we started every morning when we were together. But we always had, the people who'd never done it always had people in the room who'd done it for 3 years. So, and the first 2 or 3 times was always a train wreck. We never really figured it out until
This has been a train wreck.
a useful one. Not like the East Palestine train wreck. This was a useful train wreck.
Oh, no chemicals involved.
No chemicals involved.
Hey, I just want to interject really quick. I agree with Sue on the thing with the response, that I didn't want to take away from you and Eric with a joyful moment by countering it with something that gave joy to me. And
Right.
then, and Joyce, I know we don't know each other. Beautiful name. That was my sister's name. But yeah, when you were talking about Alexa, I really wanted to jump in here from my Zoom thing. Go, oh yeah, my cat just died. And I thought, no, that's not what I want to do to the group, And so somewhere, me and Sue, and I'm sure Fritz, you know where we're coming from. We've learned something about kind of watching not to steal people's thunder. That's not exactly
Yes.
how I wanted to say it.
Yes, that's how I felt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
And as we get deeper into it, and by the way, I have never taught this before. This is when I said experiment.
With the
Okay.
guinea pigs.
You guys are pure guinea pigs, and I have to teach this again in a month. So,
Okay, so we're practicing.
so I'm student teacher right now.
But they're
Okay.
probably younger than us.
No, they're mixed. I'm co-leading a week-long 4-day. I'm resourcing. That's a better word. A 4-day conference in July on story and storytelling and listening and all that kind of stuff. So what listening is not? We've kind of been going around this. Is listening is not an excuse to share your own story, but sharing part of your story is a way to affirm the speaker. And that is, we've been dancing around that, and that is a fine line. And largely it's when you open your mouth. As in, if as listener you give person the time and the space to articulate their story before you open your mouth, and when you open your mouth, it's limited, you're not simply then overriding their story
Okay.
with your story. Listening is not an invitation to debate or argue or correct. Listening is not a trial. To hear someone's story does not make you judge, jury, and executioner. You don't, as a listener, get to decide if somebody's story is right or wrong, valid or invalid. Their story is their story. Period. End of discussion. Whether you can relate to it, whether you can't relate to it, their story is still their story. And it's not an audition. You are not deciding as listener whether the sharer is a friend or a foe, in or out, saved or unsaved, acceptable or unacceptable. You can listen to their story and decide you never want to have anything to do with them in the rest of your life.
Oh my God.
And that's fine. But that doesn't negate the importance of their story. That's something you've decided, but that's on you,
That's not them.
not on them. Listening is a gift to the one who is sharing. Listening is an invitation to the sharer to reveal their true self without judgment, which is probably the hardest part. And one of the reasons that people go to therapists and not their friends is because therapists listen without judgment.
That's true, that's true.
When we were doing training in spiritual direction, this was very hard for me as a pastor. As a pastor, I was always taught part of my job was to tell people what to think and what to believe, because I'm the expert.
Solve their problems for them.
Not solve their problems, but certainly keep them directed toward Jesus,
The straight and narrow.
orthodox, straight and narrow.
Yes.
When we did our training as spiritual directors, we were told, and it took me a while to process this, but it makes a lot of sense. Our job is to go with their flow. Hear where they are. Journey with them where they are. Not to try to move them one way or another, but to help them listen and hear and have space for how God might be working in their lives, whatever that looks like, not to tell them how God is working in their lives.
Okay.
Listening is a commitment to take someone's story home with you, to let it marinate, to hear how it connects with your story. Does it challenge it? Does it affirm it? Does it scare you? Does it make you uncomfortable? Does it make you comfortable? And wrestle with it and what it means to you. And listening is a practice. It doesn't come easy. It is a practice. It is a prayer practice. Listening and prayer. Prayer, in effect, should be partly listening to God. And I think our struggle with listening is linked to how we often pray. I mean, often when we pray, we're doing the talking.
Right.
It's almost like we're going shopping. Hey, God,
I need
I need this. Great. We got that? We're good, God. You do your
That's my
job.
list today.
You do your job. So we must be intentional about how we listen. So I put together a top 10 list. How to listen. Be secure. So in therapy speak, therapists are taught, deal with your own garbage before you walk into the room. You don't take, and I'll give you an example. I had a fellow clergy person a few days ago, a couple of weeks ago, call me. She is our congregation's liaison to our administrative structure. I'm not getting all kinds of names, but it's her job to be aware of what's going on in this congregation so that the denominational structure knows what's going on in the congregation. So she calls me to find out what's going on. She's also a personal friend. She's dealing with some real issues in her congregation. She never once, after asking me to listen to what was going on in this congregation, she spent the entire phone call, no,
Talking about her.
Oh, she was
about
talking
her
about her.
problems.
her stuff.
Yeah.
Oh,
I mean, it's kind of like if you walk into a therapy session and you're suddenly find yourself,
She wanted to vent.
yeah, she was using this supposedly time when she was supposed to be listening to us as time to vent. And she needed to vent, and that's fine, but it's kind of like if you walk into a therapy session and you suddenly realize that you're giving your therapist therapy.
okay.
Be humble. This is the number one value that Jesus teaches us is humility, emptying of ourselves for the other. And humility is a huge part of listening. The listener doesn't get to decide whether what the storyteller is saying is correct, relevant, meaningful, or important. It's not on you. Be empty. To me as a pastor, that's been one of the hardest things that I've learned in the art of pastoral listening. I don't know how many times, like someone calls me, hey, pastor, can we talk? And I start in my head, because I know who's in my congregation, I know the people, and I planned out the entire conversation because I know them, I know what they're going through. So I tell myself, I know what they want to talk about. And then they walk in, and they're in a totally different place, which is fine. But to walk into a conversation as a listener, it's best to be empty, to let those preconceived notions or thoughts or the various isms just disappear. Because when we put people in a box before they even open their mouth, we close off our ears. We only hear what we want to hear. Be a host. Create space where a person can speak. One of the things I've learned as a pastor is like if I know a person is going through a rough time and I see the caller ID on my phone that they're calling, I'm only going to pick up if I'm in a time and a space where I can listen. If I'm in the supermarket, I'm not going to pick up. If I know that you're just calling to tell me that the flowers are getting delivered tomorrow, I might pick up. But if I know that you're thinking about going through a tough time with a loved one, or I'm not going to pick up. I'm going to make sure can create the space to listen, not be personally rushed. not be anxious, create space to listen. Be quiet, shut your mouth. It's hard to listen when you run your mouth. You mentioned that with your kids. Be curious, want to hear what the other person is saying. Be vulnerable, be compassionate, be grateful. The most powerful word you can say to someone if they've just poured out their story to you is thank you. You have gifted me with this. Thank you. Not you're right, you're wrong, this, that, advice, etc. Thank you.
No judgment.
No judgment. Which is really, really, really hard. And finally, be a steward of their story. Let it affect you. Take it home with you. Process it. Think about it. So I'm going to give you an example of good listening versus bad listening. This is a very real life example. Comes from 3 days ago. Horst's Deli down on 7th. I had some time to kill between dropping the dog off and having to go to a doctor's appointment, so I decided that I needed a cinnamon roll and a cup of coffee. So I was at Horst's Deli, sitting there. 2 gentlemen were at the table next to me. It was very clear by their mannerisms and stuff that this was a regular meeting, that they regularly met for coffee. They were old friends. They're talking about the weekend, they're chit-chatting back and forth. And then one of the guys says, I had to bury my horse yesterday. And his friend sitting across the table said nothing. Just nothing. Just created silence, created space. The conversation wandered around, but the first gentleman whose horses died will always come back to having to bury his horse. And every time he came back to the story about burying his horse, his friend just let there be silence, just didn't respond.
Yes.
No.
That's appropriate.
Very. And they were engaged
get that.
across the table.
I would have to respond.
They were engaged across the table. And that silence, he pulled the story, the silence, out of his friend. And his friend talked about how they had a hole there because there was another horse they thought was going to die. So they already dug the hole. Friend talked about his wife's grief. Friend talked about getting the gun because they were going to have to put the horse down and going out with the tractor, going
Yeah.
out with the gun. The friend talked about how he had the horse for 30-something years. And just these 2 friends, there was no conversation.
But the listener didn't pull any of that information from him. He just sat there and
Just
listened.
sat there, listened, engaged, completely engaged. This was not.
Oh, okay.
No,
This-
no.
this was-
No, that,
no.
I
Yeah.
hate those things.
Yeah, this
I
was
know.
completely engaged. And then finally, once his friend had gotten the whole story out, the listening gentleman kind of sat back. More silence. Paused. Said, kind of nodding. And I wasn't facing, I could feel the nodding. Said, well, you got the whole field and you're gonna save on oats. And that, but he
dear.
said it.
Oh, that's horrible.
No, because tonal, I know when I said that, you're gonna be like, well, that's horrible.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's not
but-
sympathetic.
The tone of it, these are men, they don't do emotion or sympathy. The tone of it was totally 100%. I heard you, I'm with you. It was kind of that droll farmer humor.
That's
And-
man's talk. I
Yeah,
could
it was
see
man
that.
talk.
I
I
don't
could see
get that
that.
at all.
No, I don't.
To
either.
contrast that,
It's a guy thing.
Yes.
Okay,
must-
thank you,
right.
Rick.
are you with me, Rick?
Yeah.
That was
yes.
So you're gonna,
affirmation.
so you got the whole field and it's over and it's done and you're gonna save on oats.
Yep.
Well, thanks.
Because there's hurt involved, but us guys can't express the hurt. So what we do, well, you got it done and said, like,
I could see my husband say
Yeah,
But-
now I can see that too.
But it's also saying, I heard you.
not women.
I heard
Not
that whole
women.
story.
yes.
I heard your whole story.
Right.
I sat here and I listened.
So maybe we're getting at something. Men are different than women
Men
in
are
how they're
different.
responding
Mars and
with all
Venus.
this.
Mars and Venus.
Now let's contrast that. We're gonna bring a woman into the scene.
Okay.
So, after all this is done, one of the women who work the counter at Horst's came by to top off their coffees, which is how I knew they were regulars, because you don't get that at Horst. I've never had my coffee. But she comes by and she offers them more coffee. And she says to the man, it's like, how are you doing? And the man, his horse died because a safe space had been created between these two friends.
Oh.
He offers up, well, I had to bury my horse this weekend. And she looks at him immediately and says, I hate horses.
Oh, no, I would have.
This story's
And
getting
then-
bad.
And then she proceeds on a monologue about how horrible horses are.
Oh, that's
And-
terrible.
It's like,
Fritz, read the line. I think it's great. She responds, I don't like horses. They're pretty in a field to look at, but I can't stand to be near them. They smell.
that was almost verbatim.
Really?
That, I mean, I wasn't sitting there taking notes, but that was almost verbatim.
So she wasn't
Well, that was-
compassionate here.
That was very rude, I think.
And then she argues her point. So it's what you talk, she hijacks his story.
Oh, she did.
I mean, forget about
Oh,
the whole
yeah.
insult thing.
Yeah.
She hijacks his story.
Okay.
Oh,
And now instead of him having space to
To grieve.
grieve and express his story, he finds himself defending the honor of horses and horse breeders
oh my
And-
Oh,
goodness.
that's awful.
his whole lifestyle.
No.
And his lifestyle doesn't matter. Whether or not the waitress likes or hates horses, or his friend sitting across the table his friend sitting across the table might have hated horses. His friend sitting across the table might have hated that horse. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. That's your stuff, not their stuff.
Okay.
But that's not being compassionate.
Well, no, it's not.
I mean,
Um,
I don't think women would ever do anything like that.
Well, she did.
you just,
But that
Well,
was the
yeah,
woman.
that's right, that was the woman.
That was the
Well,
The
woman.
woman. That's just,
That's rude.
and
I
if
think.
I was the gentleman, I'd go someplace else to get my coffee.
I would too, after something like that.
No. No. Because there's a guy.
What a story, Fritz.
It's very good. It's very good. And just a quick interjection is like, no. I'm a guy. That doesn't hurt me, Sue. That doesn't hurt me, Joyce. No. I can, bury that or whatever.
woman's.
You're not going to get me
It
to
would
get,
hurt me.
you're not going to get me to get upset.
Oh, it
So,
will hurt, but you're
yeah,
not gonna express it. And
right.
plus, you've been coming to the same seat in the same stool for 35 years with this friend. And where else in Fairfield Township do you get a cup
Where,
of
there's no
coffee?
place else. Okay.
And good cinnamon rolls. Yes.
Right, in East Fairfield.
Yeah.
You're gonna drive to Salem?
No.
Okay. Uh,
The
So,
guy thing is that you just can't let anybody know that you were hurt. Okay. It's a guy thing. So I'm done.
okay.
well, it is true that men and women tell stories differently, but they don't listen differently if they're good listeners, but they do tell stories differently. They express emotion differently. There is a sense that, like part of this guy's story was that he sent his wife back to the house before he shot the horse. So it was his responsibility to shoot the horse. Um, the guy is a 70-year-old Columbiana farmer. So, uh,
It's not the first horse he ever had to shoot.
probably not.
But it's still sad. You still don't
But
want to
it's
do
his
that.
horse. This was his horse.
Mm.
It was his horse. It wasn't somebody else's horse. It was his horse. That came up in the story too.
Well, my question would be, if he kept telling the story, he would say one thing, and you said there was silence, silence. Maybe he was waiting for his friend to give a little bit of a response. So he kept going, trying to get this friend to say, but I know men would have listened, but
No,
would that be something he would?
I don't, possibly. I mean, I don't know what was going on in his head, but I know that in the art of listening, silence is very useful. We tend to try to cover up silence. We get very uncomfortable with silence. But when someone is telling a story, especially a story that's very emotional or very hard, silence gives space to collect your thoughts, reflect on what you've been said, take a breath, put things kind of back together. And what this gentleman did in telling the story of his horse was very typical in that he would talk about his horse and then he would change the subject for a while, talk about things that were meaningless. And then he would go back and talk about his horse. And when he changed the subject, it was normal banter like they'd been having for 30 years or whatever. And then he would come back to his horse and his friend would start really listening again. And then would veer off again and talk about going fishing or or whatever, and then come back to the story of his horse. And that's very common
Okay.
when people
was
are wrestling
That was the
with
primary
hard.
thing on his
Yeah.
mind right now.
Right. So to kind of sum all that up, actually listening is hard. And actually listening is a gift that we give to each other. And it's very rare. And even in places where people think they should be listened to, they often are not listened to. One of the people I source a lot of this from is a church consultant, actually a guy named Eric Law. And he talks about how congregations don't listen to people in their congregation. And he actually trains congregations to listen to each other so that when people walk into church in need of healing or from difficult places in their lives, even total strangers who've never walked into the church, they can be heard and listened to in that place. And that's something that he does. It's something that very few churches
Well, we
do.
have greeters in our church. We have people,
But are your greeters trained to listen?
oh, yeah.
So
Well,
if
Well, they're
Nancy,
just greeting, they're not
Right,
getting
I
into any
mean,
conversation.
They're just saying
They're-
hello.
yeah,
what Eric Law trains congregations to do is to have not greeters, not the people with the bulletin saying hi every day, but let's say you walk in for the first time after your husband has died. Have people who are free and available, and they walk in, you walk in and they see you. They go and sit with you because you've always sat with your husband. You don't know who you're going to sit with. They ask you how you're doing. They shut up. They let you tell how you're doing. A new visitor walks in. They sit with the new visitor because the new visitor doesn't know where to sit. What's your story? What brought you here today? Not 2 seconds with the pastor. Hi, so glad that you came. But 20 minutes. By the time the visitor walks out, somebody knows them. They know somebody. They're affirmed. They're valued. That's what he does. He trains congregations in. That's something that.
And Fritz, speaking of that, someone told me to be a timekeeper, and I was listening so well to the person. What time did you want me to break in here?
About 20 minutes ago.
Oh, okay.
So we're going to totally stop and we're going to go to your stories and we're going to listen. Use everything that we've been talking about and listen to each other's stories. So if there's someone who wants to share, and we are not going to talk about each other's stories, we're just going to listen to each other's stories. We're not going to analyze each other's stories. We're going to listen, and when you're done, we're going to clap. That's what we're going to do. So who wants to go first?
Nobody wants to go first.
I've gone first before, I'm not going first this time.
Joyce looks ready.
Let Mariella go first, she's always last.
No, I want to hear somebody else go first.
well, I'll go first. I had Mary and Joseph and the baby Jesus in Bethlehem. That's what I had picked out. And then I remembered having my first child. And Marty and I waited a long time to have our first child. And I got pregnant. And almost 2 months before I was ready to have Laura, I got sick with the flu, was running a high temperature. So I was in labor for 2.5 days and I was running a temperature and they took me to the hospital. This was at Northside on Gypsy Lane. And I had her and she was perfect. She weighed 3 pounds and 7 ounces. And I wasn't put under. I saw her, she was just perfect. And by that time, my flu had left, my fever was back to normal, and it was a blessing. It was a blessing I had her, it was a blessing I was better. But she was in the hospital. She was born October 6th, and we brought her home right before Thanksgiving. That was before Todd, so she was in Northside Hospital. In the meantime, my husband was working night turn. Our dog, a big dog, somebody left it loose and bit the neighbor girl. She had to have 10 stitches in her head. That's the same day. I knew nothing about this. Poor Marty. He didn't know whether I was going to live, whether the baby was going to live. And then he's dealing with the dog biting the neighbor. Anyway, everything turned out okay. She came home. She weighed 5 pounds and 1 ounce. And I was a nervous wreck feeding her because I wasn't, at that time, you weren't allowed to touch them in the isolette. You just looked at them, you know. And the nurses cried when she left because they just loved her to death. She was in there for so long. But anyway, it turned out fine. She's going to be 57 years old. She's a wonderful person. She's a very caring daughter, and I love her to death. And that's my story. Was that okay?
Listen,
That was good.
thank you.
Thank you.
And everybody listened. Nobody said anything. That was wonderful.
Thank you, dear. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, nice.
Someone else want to go?
I'll go. Mine is from Philippians, 4:6. Don't be anxious about anything. Because I always have felt that if I could get past the anxious, God would be there to help me through whatever dilemma or trauma was going on. And I've had several times. I think I listed 5 that day that we were talking. And one in particular was that a day that my son had decided to change his life, change his direction, and go off and move to Florida by himself. Well, there was a young lady that was involved in that story too. And he was gone. He moved to Florida. It's not like he moved to Cleveland or someplace. It was a long way off. So it was several months before we got down there. As soon as school was out that spring, we took off and went to Florida to make sure he was okay. And he was fine. He'd gotten a job. He'd gotten an apartment. He was glad to see us. The Lord had taken care of him. There were not perfect times, as none of us have had easy, perfect times. No matter what we do, there's always a hill to climb or something to go through. And he did, and he got by, and we all survived. The Lord was with us.
Anyone else?
Is Rick gonna do his?
Rick skipped class last week, so I don't know if Rick has a story.
Yeah, I really, and I did read over last week, and I apologize not being there. I really have enjoyed this. But I really wasn't able to pull something together.
That's fine. This is not school. This is not like class project. Nobody's getting graded. Anyone else want to share a story?
No, I've written mine. I have to read it, I guess. And it's, I guess, not as quite as expressive. A trip to Pittsburgh for my husband Bill and me meant having a good time. It would be going to the Carnegie Museum or maybe a show at the Benetton Theater. But in recent years, though, it was going to the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, UPMC. Bill would be having surgeries, procedures, checkups. All went well. He was in good hands with Dr. Bazaz, his cardiologist. A couple of falls resulted in a broken hip and a broken arm, a really bad broken arm. These taken care of in Salem, but there was also a cancer problem. Bill was fortunate to have good health all his life, but Age crept up on him and he experienced a good many health issues. He got through them, was up and doing well, enjoying his great-grandchildren. The power of prayer was evident. When he got COVID, I felt this was something, he would get through too. Didn't he always? We had gotten our shots, but after 13 days in the hospital to try to overcome the damage to his lungs, it wasn't meant to be. Our son Steve said the minute after Bill died, Dad is fishing with Jesus.
Thank you. Ellen, yes, no, it's fine, no is fine, yes is fine.
Well, I just was thinking, in 1966, my son was born, and in 1968, my husband wanted to go to Australia. So we sold our house and we got in a plane, and you go all night and you go all day. And so we were down there for 2 years, and it was fine. It was different climate and sunny. And then I get a call from my parents that my grandmother had died, and I was very close to her. So I cried. It was on Easter. I cried all day. And I said, I have to go home and see the family. So I did. And then they proceeded to come back, and that was our trip.
So, thank you all for your stories. Thank you for the time you have given to this experiment of this class. I appreciate it. I know it was different
It was different.
from most of what you think of as Bible studies.
It was interesting, though.
So I am grateful to you. So thank you. And if you have any, like, really just without going into this, just what clicked in the last 6 weeks and what just made no sense at all? Were there things that clicked and were there things that just, like, if I was trying to communicate something, I didn't communicate it?
Well, to be a good listener,
I think it was very difficult because we're not necessarily good listeners. We interject all the time.
I
that
agree
is
with
true.
that
That
totally.
is true.
You think
I agree.
that's being a good conversationalist, is
Adding
expressing
something to a
to the
person's
story. Yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah.
their comment requires a comment from us.
yeah,
And
Yeah.
I've always believed that it was a two-way street.
yeah,
And
And that leads to small talk.
yes,
yes,
it does.
And I'm very good at that. I'm not a very good listener. Like, it's something I've struggled, like when I do home visits and stuff like that, I often find I leave and I'm like, we just had a great visit, and it was a great visit. And often if the person I'm visiting with never talks to anybody, sometimes I
and they
visit
need to
people,
talk.
just small talk is good. But I realize, like, I walk away and I'm like, they said that, and I should have shut up at that point.
Yeah.
I should just shut up and let what they were going at unfold. Instead, I didn't. I've only been doing this for 20 years.
I'll have to admit with our family, we're great interrupters, and that's a bad thing because we're always, in this conversation that we can't wait to get, like we're saying, our side of the
Yeah,
story
that's
or
true.
what we want to tell.
I think that's typical of families though, really.
Well, it's typical of people,
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
I guess.
you know?
But it is bad, to interrupt, and
Yeah.
I find myself even in this, when Pastor Fritz is talking, have you noticed? I say something, because you go on and on and on, you gotta interrupt you to,
I don't mind
that's
that.
my excuse, Pastor Fritz, for doing it.
So I have to tell you.
And Nora, it is so tempting. Even from the Zoom angle here, it's like, oh,
Thank you.
Fritz, I want to say something here.
Yeah. And I can't control myself, I guess, but that's something our family admits we have to work on, that part. And I guess that would be part of sharing, instead of letting you tell the person tell their total story, we
Right.
want to interject.
Interjects, yeah.
So this is emphasized to me, shut up.
Well, I'm just thinking back, our condo girls go out to lunch once a month, okay? We're all talking.
Yeah, right.
Sue went out a couple, everybody's just talking.
Yeah.
And you don't even realize what other people are saying, and
Right.
everybody's just talking.
Yeah.
Nobody has, not one person is telling a story. It's just,
Everybody's telling their stories,
okay, but we have a good time. We
right?
do, but,
We don't think about that we're not letting the other person tell their story.
right.
We're starting
So
to
maybe
tell our
I'll shut up the
stories.
next time we go to
Well,
lunch.
and there is a difference between talking and storytelling. So I got an email this morning and I realized that it was from someone who was interested in we just started a grief program here, and the grief, and we're basing it around storytelling and active listening. And this woman emailed me and she's like, what do you mean by that? And it made me kind of stop and think, how do I articulate this? And I said, what I mean by that is the people facilitating this, they're creating space for you to say what you need to say without comment coming back, without judgment coming back, with nobody trying to talk over you or to jump into you. And it said that's different from other grief programs, which are really good. And like, there's a very popular program around here called Grief Share, which is really, really good. And we actually,
I was in that one at our church.
and it's excellent.
It is.
It's very excellent. But it tells you a lot about how to grieve. It's very instructive. It's very scriptural, which is good.
Yes, it
And it
was.
tells you what the Bible tells you about how to grieve. It's very, and you sit there and you watch a video, and the videos are excellently done. And the facilitators are very trained in what to present. And I said, this isn't that. Where nobody in this grief thing is, and that has its place. I'm not deriding that at all. But nobody's telling you about grief processes or whatever. They're just creating space for you to grieve in a organized way. And those spaces are rare, especially in the church. And it's something I'm just become, as we've been working with the hub and working on this book and this, it's just something I'm very acutely aware of. And but we also get we can get uncomfortable when we try to create those spaces. So I mean, we walk into church and we're trained not to interact with each other in church. You interact before church, you interact after church. We're trained not to interact during church. You sit, you're silent,
We're listeners.
you're listeners. But nobody's listening to you.
That's not what we're there for. We're there to listen to you.
Right, but there can also be healing and blessing if you walk in and somebody's there to listen to you. It's like all unidirectional.
Okay.
Controlled. Church is very controlled.
Well, don't you think it has to be to a certain extent? I mean,
I'm
if you were the preacher, or you are the preacher, but if the preacher's there and everybody in the congregation sitting in their chairs talking to one another,
well, right,
that is
but
ignorant, I think.
but right, that's disrespectful.
Very
But what I
much
mean
so.
controlled is, so I'm the official preacher. You know, I got degrees.
Right.
I've been screened. I've been taught. My job is to enforce what is correct
And scriptural.
in Scripture. That's my job. That's what I've been trained to do. I could be fired if I didn't. You know, if stuff came out of my mouth that was not correct, that was not doctrinal, that was not within the official tradition of the Presbyterian Church USA, whatever that means now, then, you know, the elders of the church could be like, Fritz, you know, you're out of you're not enforcing what is to be enforced. But at the same time I'm speaking, there are as many people in the room having their own stories, their own experiences, their own understanding of that scripture, their own understanding of how that scripture that relates to life. Some of them are much more relatable than what I'm relating to. And we've enforced a code of silence on all of that. None of that matters. And part of this whole experiment that I've been on these last few years with the hub and things is saying, what happens when we throw that out, when we throw this model of having one person who's in charge out the window, one person who gets to decide for everybody else what God is saying and doing, what scripture means. Well, if we just take that and chuck it out the window and say, let's create space where instead of having one official person, we can hear from each other.
Well, how's that gonna work?
Well,
You're not gonna have a sermon then.
When the hub gathers for worship, there is no sermon.
Well, what, somebody's leading it, what do you do?
Create space for stories.
Oh, so you're suggesting instead of sermon, storytelling?
So what we do in the hub, we do various things, but what we do in the hub, our favorite question, we read a Bible story. Our favorite question is, where does this story connect with your story?
Well, how many weeks would that go? People
Oh,
would,
eternally.
well, I mean, people would get tired, they'd end up not telling their story. They'd
I don't know,
finish
Rick, are
telling
you
their
tired yet?
stories.
No, nor there seems to be another story that just pops up from somewhere.
Oh, okay. Oh, so you're part of the hub.
And
Yes.
the connections are transcendental.
Well, put it this way, if you have a preacher give a sermon on a certain scripture, it goes a half hour, 45 minutes. You're really learning that particular scripture.
Exactly.
You're not hearing a bunch of other stories and their stories relating like we did to that scripture. You're learning. I mean, this is what the preacher went to school for, is to teach us that's
Right.
just,
The preacher's job is to control what
well, I
you
don't know
hear.
if the word
It's
control.
No, it's control.
Well, it
I'm a
is
preacher.
to,
I think
what
it
it
should
is.
be respect.
yeah, that's a better word, yeah.
Respect. You have to respect your preacher.
Not-
You have to
not-
respect your preacher, but the preacher's job
That would be a strict, not the
The-
right word, control.
I respect the preacher here. I'm the preacher. For it's,
You're not in control, we're in control, we're listening to you. If we didn't like you, we could get up and leave.
you could. That's correct. But my job as a preacher, which is different from my job as a pastor, and not all
Yes.
preachers are good pastors, and not all
Right.
pastors are good
Well,
preachers.
that's true too.
My job as a preacher is to present the Bible to you correctly.
Right.
So my job, and we're gonna wrap this up because I can go on this forever because we spent years thinking about it. So,
Don't have my house cleaned by the time I get up.
and just flow with me here, and then you can say I'm bogus, which is fine, but there's a dark, there's immense light in the church. There should be immense love in the church. There should be, churches should and do, when they're good, connect people to God. They should connect people to each other. They should transform the world. But there's another aspect, one that I've become more sensitive to the older I've gotten, which is there's another side of religion, which is the side of control. And when, especially in the world of institutional religion, churches, it is a sense of wanting to control Scripture, control who God is, control how people live and act. You have the Pope on top, and I'm going Catholic here because it's the most hierarchical, but you have the Pope on top. The Pope knows what God wants. Pope is connected to God, and what comes down is what the Bible says and what God wants you to do and how you access God. And whoever can control that also controls people. So there's this aspect of control, and this is a very real aspect. I mean, I work within a denominational system. I have books upstairs that tell me what God does and thinks. They're very good books. They're mostly right. It is my job to then relay that to the people so that they are right with God and so that they can follow the correct rules and hopefully get into heaven. And we, the Presbyterian Church USA, built this structure because we have the correct rules and you don't.
Well, our
and-
church is independent, we're not ruled
We're not
by,
affiliated with any
Yeah.
But you're independent, you're not affiliated with the denomination,
Right.
but
denomination.
if you look at that stream of thought, there's still rules, there's still doctrines, there's still understanding.
Well, it's the Bible. We go straight from the Bible, our church.
Every-
in her years
But
past.
every church goes straight from the Bible.
They better.
They should.
There is not a church in the existence of humanity that does not claim to go straight from the Bible.
Jonestown, remember that guy?
They
Yeah.
claim to go straight from the Bible.
well, can we start interjecting for
Yeah.
what, okay, if you have a group of people expressing, a lot of people wouldn't come to church because they don't wanna like we're open, we're expressing ourselves. A lot of people are bashful. They don't wanna, they wanna go and hear the message. They don't wanna go and interact.
And that's why we have
interact
church
with people.
service on Sunday morning and hub some other time.
Okay, yeah, because certain people don't want that type
Well,
of,
the Catholics don't intermingle. They go to church and that's it. They're not even,
yeah. It's hard to,
But we do, we have the opportunity, Rick goes to the hub, and many do. I have not been there, but I understand that it's
well, you
well
could,
received, and they really like that, and it's been a positive situation.
well, you could
But some of
liken
us
it,
are not involved in that.
well,
Right,
you
which
could
is,
liken it to Bible, like Sunday school. That's where you interject
Yeah,
and talk, and as your Sunday school classes. Do you
Right.
have a Sunday school class, or is it the hub?
you're in Sunday school right now.
well, see, we
Well,
have a
there
Sunday
you
school
go.
class
But the
at our
hub isn't
church.
Sunday school, because the hub doesn't tell people what to believe.
Well,
Well, they don't
that
tell-
is what we're
But you
we're
start with the
that's what
Bible.
church
Yeah,
is.
you
is
start
that-
with the Bible.
But it goes back to sum it all up, and this has been my thinking, it all goes back to lenses.
Mm-mm.
So it all goes back to lenses. All that conversation about lenses and hearing each other's lenses, that it fullness in faith, fullness of understanding doesn't and can't come in isolation, whether that's isolation of a tradition or isolation of an individual, because of the multiple lenses. If I'm going to understand this Bible, if I'm going to understand how God is working and speaking in this world, I've come to feel that I need to not only hear and understand what I've been taught as a Presbyterian minister, what is right, but I also need to hear and understand what my Catholic sister has been taught as a Catholic. And I need to hear and understand what my Pentecostal brother has been taught as a Pentecostal. I need to hear and understand how my friend who's never been to church but has read the whole Bible, what that friend is thinking, because God's working in that friend too. I need to hear and understand what people who have been shut out of the process, who've been told that their views are wrong, or that they're wrong, that they don't have a right to read the Bible, they don't have a right to interpret the Bible.
So what you're saying, and I'm going to interject,
Yeah, interject.
is that we need to be accepted and hear the stories of other people who may be different from us, who see things from a different lens. I don't think we have to necessarily agree
Correct.
with what they say, but
Correct.
we have to allow them to have their story, to hear what they're saying, to affirm to them that they have
Right.
a story that is their own,
And it has value
and it has value to them.
to them and to us. Even if we disagree with it, it
Even
has
if we
value
disagree
to
with
us.
it, yes, sometimes hearing a different point of view has value to me because maybe it helps affirm my own. But nevertheless,
stop and
I
think.
think we have to hear what someone else is saying and understand that they have heard it or grown up with a different philosophy, through a different lens,
Right. Right.
and be respectful to them.
Right.
Well, even go beyond respectful, hear them.
Hear them. Give them the the value
the
that
value
they
of,
are needing.
And the reason, Sue, you're doing that
Yes,
is a form, I'm going to say a form of love.
okay,
And isn't that kind of what Jesus Christ wants us to do?
Of one another.
thanks, Rick.
right, when we
Well, thank you,
refuse
Sue.
someone's story, we refuse their existence.
Okay,
If we tell someone their story doesn't matter, we tell them that they don't matter.
Right.
If we tell someone that their experience with God doesn't matter, then we are telling them that they have no worth in
Okay.
front of God.
So you're saying we should be accepting every religion, whatever their beliefs are,
I,
because we love them.
If they believe.
I
in-
didn't.
For them.
I don't know
no,
about
no,
that.
maybe for them.
I,
But
If-
no-
I
if-
not
I'm
for
not
us.
refuting, I'm not gonna argue, but I can't agree
I
with,
didn't say, there's a difference between hearing
And accepting,
and
oh,
accepting.
I
Okay.
totally, yeah.
So
okay.
I didn't say good, they're accepting.
what I'm saying is, let's say you're sitting with a sister and brother who's Hindu. And let's say that sister and brother who's Hindu begins talking about their spiritual relationship and how they feel God working in their lives. What I'm pushing at is we have a couple of responses. One response is to say, you're Hindu, you haven't read the Bible, you don't know anything about God, you don't know how God's working in your life,
Oh,
your story is simply false,
oh,
you don't matter.
wouldn't do that.
The other response is to say, I hear how God is working in your life. I see that God is working very powerfully in your life. God also works in my life. We connect there.
Mhm.
And and maybe even taking some of what they experience and you're finding that informs my own faith. That informs my own relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that you're saying that Jesus doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that you're saying that that in order to hear their story, you have to deny your own faith. The opposite is true. The opposite is true. People who I know who are involved in interfaith dialogue say that their faith gets stronger and stronger and stronger because the most insulting thing that you can say to someone, I believe, especially of a different religion or even a different, is like, it doesn't matter, there's no difference. Because that's bogus. It does matter, there is differences. But to listen, to respect, and to say, your experience with God is as valid as my experience with God because it's your experience.
Right.
And I can carry that with me. I can carry your experience with God with me and not simply say, it doesn't matter, you don't understand. Which is, to go circle fully back, that's exactly what, when you're trying to tell your husband something and your husband's like, oh, I don't see it that way, it can't be true.
Well,
And
that's
goes
happened
out.
many times.
And you're left feeling like, well, screw you. And you're feeling diminished, not hurt.
Okay.